Good evening, everybody present here at this moment, those who may join us momentarily, and those who may watch this recording of a time of collaboration and fellowship here under the banner of Bridging Jeff Park. You know what it is that we're doing. We're holding space for deepening friendships and wisdom as people committed to our neighborhood, not reinventing the wheels that other people are working on, but really looking in our gatherings and interactions in between our gatherings to what it looks like to be a positive neighborly force. I started thinking today about Bridging Jeff Park being kind of like the mortar between the bricks, maybe, various projects and organizations efforts beyond this coalition, which has existed since right before COVID. So because we are recording tonight, I want to just invite others here to introduce themselves, what organization or organizations you have your heart and head in. And then I think we'll skim quickly over some of the recap notes and spend the bulk of this first half hour jumping into some reflections inspired by this book on nostalgia. So I'll start. Jackie Belisle, and have been pastoral staff at Eden Church since 2014, first as associate, then as lead pastor, and care deeply about each of our coalition partners, the Chamber, JPNA, JPF, Congregational Church, and Redeemer of Calvary United Methodist. I did serve several years on the board of the Chamber and continue to try to find ways to support it and all these other fine endeavors. Brian, a brief word from you.
Can everybody hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Excellent. My name is Brian Wardman, and I'm part of the Jefferson Park Neighborhood Association, where my roles are vice president, and I'm also in charge of multimedia, which includes the website, and it also includes our newsletter. There's one other organization that I've been involved with, which has kind of like a sliver within the Jefferson Park neighborhood, and that's an organization called VASA, Lodge Boston 466, which is a Swedish organization that is nationwide. And my role there is cultural lead.
Thank you. Great. Well, welcome, Grace. We're just finishing a lap of very brief reintroductions for this session, which we are recording tonight for the sake of those not with us. So Gwen, and then Noemi.
I'm Gwen Carlson from Redeemer of Calvary Church down the block from Eden. And I'm also on JPNA, and I'm also a member of the Chamber.
Good evening to everyone. My name is Noemi Mesa. I am pastor of the Redeemer of Calvary Church. Our neighbor church is the Church of Pastor Jackie. And we are part of Jefferson Park Association and also a member of this Bridge Association.
Great, thanks. Grace, and then Eric.
Hi, I'm Grace Hoydel, and my cat's name is Dove, and I'm not really involved in anything to much extent except the Forest Preserves projects.
Right. Wonderful. And Eric, would you like to say a brief word about you and your interest at this Bridging Jeff Park table, or drop it in the chat, whichever you prefer?
Okay, I hear. I hope be Grand Way 2026. I want to invite the people from BJP to come to my graduation, but I don't know it's gonna be at Joe on here. But I'm still working on it.
That's great. I appreciate Eric's presence. I think of you, Eric, as kind of a free-range neighbor, sharing goodwill and provoking everyone to do their best in these endeavors in which we are involved. And so I will certainly be marking your graduation party on our collective calendars. As we jump into the meeting tonight, I just want to acknowledge that our great colleague Sarah is away on a well-deserved vacation. And I would have made you dinner tonight, except that I'm recovering from a cold that took me out this weekend. So I thought we would adapt and do a Zoom session. The agenda that I shared by email and in the chat has some things plugged in there that are pretty self-evident in terms of recap from recent meetings, including a brief financial report there. And what I'd really love to do is spend the next half hour or so stirring the pot about this nostalgia book, and doing this in a way that can allow Noemi to weigh in. If I don't know if you've skimmed any. I think Grace, you grabbed a copy. Gwen, has anyone read a bit?
Smidge.
Yeah. I read a smaller smidge today than I thought I was going to, but enough to get me excited. So, I think just to be a good steward of people's time, recognizing that not all of us have read a lot, what I thought I would do is just open up to share some of the bigger ideas from the first 4 chapters. And then really would love to hear just kind of first takes and any pushback, really, because I know nostalgia could be dismissed, as he says in the opening chapters, as a problematic or a merely sentimental exercise. I'm going to be very interested in hearing how we think of nostalgia in terms of not just our own individual lives, but in particular nostalgia for communities, and maybe if we've had a long time in this neighborhood, but maybe particularly Jefferson Park, but maybe not limited to Jefferson Park. So feel free to interrupt me as I skate along. Feel free to put some questions or comments in the chat box. I'd like to just spend a few minutes outlining some introductory thoughts. One of the things that moved me from the beginning of this very accessible book by Clay Routledge is that he's very clear at the very, very beginning of this accessible book that he sees humans as a progress-oriented species, moving, adapting, coping, integrating as we go along as individuals or societies. And he says in the early pages that it differs across cultures and times, whether a particular culture or group of people might kind of emphasize more change than stability, but that as a whole, those are both things that the human species values. Innovation, adaptation in the present for the future, longing to improve ourselves, but also that we have a psychological need for continuity with the past. And that kind of theme really struck a chord with me. It's something I feel like I've been percolating on for a while, is a sense that maybe in our modern day, we're erring too much on the new, fast, and what is the right corrective to that if it needs to be corrected. So this idea of us needing a sense of continuity is one theme in these early chapters. And he's quick to say here, as he introduces these ideas underlying his research and the research of his colleagues, that looking at the past in a healthy version of nostalgia is not about going backward. It's about bringing things of value forward. And I just think that's a really interesting provocative framework, because I do think often, and I'm speaking from my experience as pastor, but also I kind of had my identity as citizen on today as I was reading this, right? That we live in a time when there's a lot of rhetoric about, let's say, making things great again. And to hold space for this being not head in the sand going back, but a human need, a human yearning to find the things of worth to bring forward. As a pastor, I've been educated to think of nostalgia in the church as a problem and something to be overcome. And I'm really freshly interested in, how does the conversation change if there's a little life-giving thread in nostalgia that ought to be tapped, right? In our conversations as Bridging Jeff Park, and I'm thinking in particular of the June presentations with the Northwest Chicago Historical Society, we saw these great pictures. I think most of them were black and white about back in the day when Jefferson Park was. You can kind of fill in the blank. That big street was thriving. We had small businesses. People sat on their porches. Kids could run and play and not be worried. My neighbors would discipline my kids if I didn't get to it. We could think about like how that spirit of nostalgia about back in the day can unveil values that people want to tap into, not to go back, but to help us find a way to go forward, right? And I think I'm just gonna say this last thing and then pause for a little bit before I hop a chapter or two ahead. For these last couple months, as I've been preparing for our conversations, I've been aware that, as a citizen, we can paint nostalgic stories about past decades of our country's life and be very myopic in thinking about when things were better for me or my people, and not think about all of the suffering that is beneath the textbook stories of our country's past, right? And so, I'm very aware of the dangers of a nostalgic story that is a partial telling of history. And I think that's the edge, right, that we would want to pay close attention to be careful about when we think about reclaiming the goodness of the past as a value. He says on page 3 that this tendency is not a barrier to progress. The past paves the way for a better future, just as the lessons of history are critical to progress. Personal and collective memories offer valuable guidance for the decisions we need to make going forward. So then in these next pages, what he does is he introduces kind of the journey in the literature from thinking of nostalgia literally as a brain sickness, from the observations of Swiss doctors trying to take care of their soldiers who were suffering because they were away from home, and through the literature as the medical researchers inevitably gave up on finding some biological location of like what's wrong with you if you're nostalgic, kind of shifting it into the clinical psychological realm and the evolution toward thinking of it as a potentially significant psychological asset. That really summarizes very, very, very loosely the introduction and the first chapter. Talks about marketing in the first chapter and how productive playing to your nostalgia can be for selling you things, because of the emotions and sensations that come to bear. So I'm gonna pause there. Gwen read a bit. I think Grace may have nodded. Did you nod that you had read a bit?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
Enough that I feel like I already have things to add and say, if that's okay.
sure.
Well, it's so timely, this book and the discussions we had last week in JPNA. For those who weren't
Mm.
there
Mm.
was a bit of discussion about when we say we have a value, how do we determine that value? The value in question was the character of the neighborhood, preserving the character of the neighborhood. And that alone is extremely nostalgic, but the lack of definition into what we mean when we're talking about that was very loud. Everybody who was there, both Brian and Gwen would agree, I think. And maybe we're talking about architecture, maybe we're talking about race and class, more likely the second two. And it just made me think of that.
Yeah.
Because I don't have a second.
I'm
second
sorry I
thought.
missed that conversation.
Oh yeah, it was very interesting.
Very poignant. That reminds me that this little coalitional experiment that came to be called Bridging Jeff Park was started from a little seed grant from a large church in Edgewater, and we literally asked for, I don't know, less than $1,000, I think, to start a set of experiences to bring people together to learn more about the neighborhood's past and changes, right? And like literally underneath that was an idea that maybe we could approach the conversations of that are inevitably ugly and divisive about change in a different kind of key. Like what does it mean to want to learn about the history and the change in a freshly kind of storytelling way, you know?
Yeah. And if we think about nostalgic past America, we're thinking obviously about a white supremacist America, and some folks might think fondly of the peace and comfort they might have felt, and that speaks now too. We need peace and comfort, but we need it all together. And I think
Yes.
there's no reason to discard those feelings. It just needs to be up to snuff with human rights, obviously.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in here on that thread? I'll kind of conclude that wave and take us back to the book in a minute.
Yeah, this is Brian. I'm sorry I was not part of that conversation last month because when JPNA talks about character of the neighborhood, we are only referring to density. We're not referring to anything but that. So if you take a look at our platform statement, it is very succinct and precise when we're talking about it. What we don't want to see is the neighborhood becoming extremely high density involved. We want to, and we're okay with it growing in density, but at a slower rate, not at a quick rate. So when we talk about character of the neighborhood, that's what we're referring to, and we're very specific about that. So anyone who reads anything more into that, they're just trying to make trouble. So it's nothing more than that.
Well, it is a diverse neighborhood in terms of views and sentiments on those issues. I think what I've always strived to do is to not speak in big generalizations about what people mean when they say this or what people mean when they say that, and to just try to go deeper into hearing it. And that's what Grace, your sharing made me think of when you talked about peace and comfort. Many people in a kind of more progressive and sophisticated social science worldview, we talk about the importance of being you know, trauma informed, or we talk about the importance of validation and empathy. And I think, you know, maybe a resource like this and conversations about it can kind of put us along the track of not demonizing peace and comfort. Like not demonizing peace and comfort, but at the same time insisting on holding that complexity together that you talked about, right? Peace and comfort for everyone. Yeah. Gwen, Noemi, can you jump in here before you go?
Yes, yes. Thank you for giving me the chance to talk. What we have been reading make me remember the time when I was living in this country for a long time that I didn't have a chance to visit my family in Peru. It was like a homesick.
Yeah.
It was painful to me. But I really wanted to go back home. And I decided because I said, medicine is not gonna heal this emptiness. So when I went back to my country, I revisited all the places where I grew up, even from my childhood. And it was a mixed emotions, pain, but also pleasure and excitement that, oh, look where I come from and where I am now. So I think that somehow it propelled me to continue going forward. That's why I think that nostalgia, if we decide, is an energy that needs to be lit somewhere for our own sake, for our own healing. So I think so my daughter is going through these things also now in Peru. She haven't been there for about 20 years. So here she got sick. And then now she's like walking all the spaces that she was walking when she was child. She's meeting with friends from her school, middle school, and places where she was in a childhood. And I think it's the process of healing for her. Very,
Yeah.
very interesting.
Oh, yeah. Well, and that's such a beautiful way that you've spoken about the complexity of the energy that you experienced going back, and then also the complexity of our healing, and that there's something about the reconnecting, even if it's not all even if it's not all sort of like simplistically positive, right? Like just having the reconnecting in an embodied way with the stories that are a part of who we are, right? And the people who are a part of who we are. Yeah. Noemi, I know you're gonna leave in a second. Did you have a chance to start the reading?
Just the introduction. Just the introduction.
Yeah, me. All right, so I got through about chapter 4 for tonight. So catch up to us and read maybe through 5 or 6. And on Tuesday, September 2nd, we'll have another book chat at 6:30.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Enjoy your meeting. Yeah.
Bye.
Gwen, Eric, did you have anything to add here?
I would just say, when I think of nostalgia, well, I've lived in Jefferson Park now for over 65 years. I hate to say it. But I remember my nostalgia part is what my grandmother was very important to me because my parents worked. And so I was with her a lot. So we would go walking up Jeff. You know, it's like, let's go up Jeff. So we'd walk up Jeff. So to me, it was the connection of being with my grandmother, you know, in a very positive way. And then because we had a lot of stores up there, you know, I can remember all the stores that were there, you know, and you knew the people in the stores because they worked for, you know, they stayed in that job for quite a long time. So it's a very positive nostalgia for me. I mean, we can't
Yeah.
stay there, you know, we've moved on, and that's fine. That's the way it should be. But it's, to me, it was very positive feeling because you were connecting with other people in the neighborhood because we did a lot of walking. Because that's when I
Yeah.
was younger and I didn't drive. So we did a
Yeah.
lot of walking. And then you would meet people along the way too, which I think is very important. So it is the connection with people.
Yeah, here in chapter 2 or 3 somewhere he talks about, across the research, and it is interesting how he emphasizes in the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a lot of international research about this. So
Right.
across cultural groups, that's
Right.
interesting. But he talks about it's a pretty solid thread that when we are nostalgic, it is so often about our people and our relating to them. The memories are always social.
Right.
And then also about key events or experiences, milestones,
Right.
even I think that would say. And so, just lifting up nostalgia about Jeff Park in particular as you're talking, wise elder. Um, you hear in what Gwen shared, because I'll say, that intimacy about significant family,
Mhm.
right? And then a sense of the well-being, of the neighborhood that was conveyed, I think, because of the economic activity, right? And I
Right.
think when we're in settings, Brian, at JPNA, JPF, other settings, chamber settings, with just this longing for what is the right kind of revitalization, what's the right pace, what's the right whatever, there it is, because there's a sense in which we associate the right kind of economic activity with a sense of well-being, right? And that a people feel peace and comfort in their neighborhood. Not just driving through it to go
Mhm.
somewhere else, not just sleeping here, but having meaningful life elsewhere, but associating, a diverse set of activities for people to experience together. I think my partner was talking about, maybe one of you will know about this concept. And well, actually, I think it might have inspired the founding of that ministry outreach on Milwaukee that was there for a while, called Third Space Chicago. That was started by the Park Ridge Church. This is like a broader concept that society needs us to have third spaces,
Mhm.
places outside. I think it means places outside of home or work where we gather, and
Mhm.
that's a part of our well-being. So a vibrant neighborhood has lots of those kinds of spaces that are more social connecting. And I think that's a nostalgia thread I often hear on the Northwest side. Um,
Can I jump in?
yeah,
I think it's interesting too, not also third spaces physically, but sort of the third space type of person, a loose tie that you might see, and everything's so convenientized now, you pick up your groceries without even talking to somebody, or you walk down the street and it's like everybody's in their car going 30 miles past you. And it does feel really different than how it did. And I don't know the right answer to revitalize economically, how we do that. I feel like the right answer would be to degress and stop with the technology. I don't want to sound stuffy, but I think a lot of people feel nostalgic for flip phones or whatever because they think that we had it good enough in terms of how we communicate with each other. And I personally agree. I have a flip phone. You might have seen it last month.
well, that's great.
Yeah, I think it's I think the third place person is something that's really important too in nostalgia.
I love that. I Yeah, I mean, I think the experiences of happening upon people or opportunities, and like that's a kind of part of a kind of a leisure experience when you're not so overly hurried and you're not so like where everything's not so overly utilitarian that you're just trying to execute things the fastest possible way. Okay. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I agree. I agree with exactly what was mentioned about people just don't seem to talk as much. One of the things I do every year is for 1 month, I go away from social media altogether. I don't know if you remember that, Jackie. That's one of the things I
Oh.
normally do. But that means no Facebook, no YouTube, none of that social media stuff that you would know, Instagram, none of that stuff. And that says a lot for someone who's in charge of multimedia for JPNA. So I do put that aside for 1 month. But I think what you have to do is when you're in a setting and you're talking to people, is that's when you have to put the phone aside. You have to say, you know what, I'm here to communicate with people. I mean, if anyone's ever seen me in a social setting, I get around and I talk. So that I think that's very important, and it's harder for the younger people, especially the ones that in high school and late grammar school during the COVID years, because they didn't have that connection with their classmates for a couple of years,
Mm.
and it really hurt them, I think, the most.
Yeah. Yeah. I think many of us carry a concern about that, a far-reaching concern. And I was reminded, this book is written recently enough ago that he references some of his own experiences during COVID. He and his wife, and thinking about the ways their thoughts about nostalgic thoughts about what they were missing, kind of as a frame for remembering who's important, what's important to them. Well, I'm gonna just move a little bit forward here. Well, Eric, you had put a question in the chat a few moments ago, so I want to circle back to you and see if there's anything that hasn't been answered from your question a few minutes ago. You said, "What are you saying?" I don't know if that was a technical question or a philosophical question.
A more question about anti-race issues, about what we were saying in the meeting, about the philosophy.
I'm sorry about the. Apologize. Could you just repeat that last part of that sentence?
And
Oh,
anti-race issues.
yeah, right. Right. And so if you saw in the notes, one of the things that this group began talking about over the last month or so is, working with others committed to exploring with resources how to talk about those themes here in our neighborhood, where racism shows up structurally or personally, and a commitment to address that. So clearly, back to Grace's wise words a few minutes ago, we want peace and comfort, and God help us to want that for all, right? One of my favorite versions of the golden rule, and you may know that there's different versions of the golden rule across cultures and religions. Well, seriously, the one most vibrant and convicting in my heart is the one from Islam. And it goes something like this. One is not a believer who does not want for other people what they want for themselves. One is not a believer who does not want for other people what they want for themselves. And I think that, I think as different kinds of resource toolboxes and workshops, experiences are created to investigate and examine, where we are in terms of our racial injustices and our racial healing, that often you can, I think, really unlock awareness and repentance on the part of people who don't understand their complicity with racism. If you help them understand that, what's often called white privilege, and there's constructive educational ways to do that. I think there's non-constructive educational attempts to do that. And I'm looking forward to those conversations in the coming months. Um,
I wave my hand. I take a car back. I come.
say
I
again,
take it. I put it in the chat.
you're taking a class on Black psychology.
What that mean?
Yeah. And is there a particular book title or resource that would be helpful to put in the chat about that Black psychology? If so, go ahead and do that. I think, as I often think with heavy heart about our great divides today in this country, not to mention the great diverse sufferings of the world. And I think, some days it's challenging to think about whether we'll find a constructive, beloved community version of a way forward. And so I think, many people are very on fire with the very important work of understanding the ugliness of the past and the sins of the past in ways that are not taught formally, particularly in Eurocentric curriculums or cultures or whatever. And I just think one of the things, and this is total Jackie Belisle opinion, may have relevance to Jefferson Park or not, you can tell me. I think one of the ways we go wrong is to focus only on the ugly, awful, sinful past. And that what people are longing for is some kind of model, some kind of framework that tells the truth of that without censure and tells of the values also, or the memories, the reminiscing, the experiences that were beautiful or are enduringly beautiful or important. And I think one of the reasons, fervent left and fervent right can't hear each other is because we haven't figured out how to do both. How to be nostalgic in the right, self-examining, humble way. How to be social justice advocates in a way that doesn't just want to blow torch everything down, but assumes that there might be some things that fallen, imperfect people got right. And so that's you'll hear that in me in the coming weeks. I'm in a spot in my life as a person and a leader, just a longing to try to figure out the both and where it is. And maybe it's not everywhere, So just spending a few more minutes in chapters 2 and 3, then chapter 2 is where he really outlines his vision, his commitment, that nostalgia is about the future and about building a better future, not about the past. I think even addressing our political situation today, one could argue that the people who are being nostalgic in a way we wouldn't want to be, they're wanting to build a future. Like they're wanting to safeguard their future. Our job as people who care about peace and comfort, prosperity and justice for all would be to find the aspects of the past that are resource for building a future that is more equitable and just. in his basic argument on page 18, first sentence in the second paragraph, if anything, people don't fully appreciate the power of nostalgia and thus don't use it to its fullest potential. I think that's his basic point that he'll repeat, over and over again. That's not just about happy memories. He'll say there on page 20, but it's about this more complex thing of pulling together and that as we're meditating on some aspect that may be constructive nostalgia, we're pulling some thread of our personal story, our family, our community story in order to be motivating and purposeful for moving forward. He says on page 23, nostalgia counters social pain. But more than that, nostalgia helps us restore our social lives. By reminding us of fulfilling past social experiences, nostalgia inspires us to prioritize goals that create fulfilling future social experiences. On 24 in the middle, he says, when we experience nostalgia, we aren't running to the past for protection. We are pulling the past to the present to help us plan the future. I'll pause there. If there's any fresh conversation about the written text or things that have occurred to you in the last couple minutes.
I think it's interesting in the very beginning when he says that people who want to live on the farm and work remotely are benefiting from modernity, but they're wanting to go back to a certain charming life. And I think the same can be said for how we move forward with reparations, Black psychology, educating ourselves on other ways of life and including everyone in our comfort and safety, where when we move forward, it's not that we have to say give up our office job because we want to live on a farm. We can do sort of the modern version of that and kind of use our old nostalgic ideas to live a nice peaceful life with goats and coffee.
Right. He really, in bringing up that kind of thread, you hear that, his assumptions of a certain kind of psychological and social power that we have to make choices to integrate or to adapt in our own terms, if you will. The philosopher Ken Wilber would call it transcend and include. And, I think it goes without saying that, maybe a psychologist is making an argument that human potential, we're wired to have that kind of power to make those amends, those adaptations, compromises that are values oriented, and that in the real material world, some of us have more power than others, like to fulfill those material goals. But I did really like how we put that forward. Thank you for reminding us of that example of the modern life and versus and finding a way to include the nurturing aspect of a slower, more natural, more nature-based life. I'll tell you Jackie trivia at 7:31 after we adjourn. That section that you just referred to, Grace, really made me smile big. Chapter 3 talks a lot about our imagination. Talks about what are the aspects of our psychological makeup that make this whole project of evaluating past and bringing it forward. He talks about our imagination. He talks about our self-awareness and how we're wired to think about our lives over time, holding those things in together. He calls the temporal consciousness, and talks to you about symbols and how important that is. And that's an important aspect. Just thinking, I'm not really a psychological expert, although I was an undergrad social work major. And psychology was one of my, 3 or 4 would-be minors. I think that he might be talking kind of simplistically in this chapter about ranges of cognition and what people across, across spectrums are capable of. I'm not really an expert in all of that. But I think at the very least, I can give him credit that he's trying to help us understand how important story making is for our sense of well-being, our sense of empowerment, and our sense of hope in working with others for our best life. At the end of that chapter, the bottom of page 38, I marked this to quote, "When people experience life events that are painful, chaotic, and anxiety-provoking, they often look to the past to restore well-being and find hope. Learning how nostalgia works, the different ways it serves human flourishing, and specific strategies to get the most out of nostalgia can help us, live a richer and fuller life." So I did personally read on through chapter 4, but I wonder if it might not be wise to pause there in terms of the text and just publicize to others that on Tuesday, September 2nd, if that's a time that all of us can make, I'm willing to reschedule it. If not, that we'll just go ahead and read part 2, talk about part 2, chapters 4 through 6. So let's have a couple more minutes of just free range conversation, if you will. Things that might feel appealing about this direction of conversation, things that might make us feel squeamish or uncomfortable. And then I'll turn to some announcements that are buried there in our notes document. Any closing thoughts to wrap up the book part? Yeah, right. Let me go ahead and return to our notes document then. Yeah, put this up. We're carrying some announcements in the notes. Go. Yeah, before we jump into the announcements, maybe just let's take maybe a silent moment just to call back into our mind whatever version of nostalgia about something, someplace, or time. That's your own personal example. And just do that in silence in a moment here. And as we continue to read and think and share, pray that those things will be blessed by your attention. Before we close tonight, I just want to make these announcements under 5A through E. Those were in the notes from last time. All events coming up, or past Jeff Fest, of course, but the upcoming movies in Robert Square, upcoming campfire and gong bath at Eden. Feel free to ask me if you have any questions about that. Picnic at LaBagh Woods. Gwen is still on for Redeemer. That's
Mhm.
right.
Yes.
Eric, we're going to be waiting for your date on your graduation party, and we'll keep that there in the notes. And then also, sadly, while the Redeemer Church is having a picnic in LaBagh Woods, Congregational Church in Eden will be over at Congregational having a picnic. Maybe we can do better next year.
I think so. That would be a
Alright.
good idea.
All right. I've added a few things to the announcements here. Maybe you were on an email thread that came, I think, from Representative LaPointe's office about an important event about housing, kind of explaining housing insecurity and housing shortage and such. It's called Housing Unlocked, and that's on 26th of this month at 6. Grab that link there from the notes if you need that. I added on here a couple things Eden folks and Redeemer are working on. Our after-school program, that's 1 day a week, will resume next Tuesday. My colleagues Sarah and Jeff are working to roll out some seniors-oriented services from a grant that we got. We'll have a very meditative prayer for peace service on Thursday night, the 11th. There's some other stuff looking ahead. Our colleague Paul Madsen from Friendship Community Space wrote a couple hours ago wanting to make sure that we knew that they continue to serve their Thursday afternoon meal at Friendship. And so I warmly invited people. I think that's at 3 o'clock. I'm sure you can find more information at their website. Are there other organizational announcements that would be beneficial to add here? Anybody? Grace, are you involved in that Fall Forest Preserve Day something? I saw the sign on Foster every time I drive west toward church.
I saw that. I know. I work primarily with Forest Glen right now, and last weekend I didn't hear anything about it, but I need to look into it because I want to be.
Yeah, please look into it, and I would like to promote it. I
Me
keep
too.
forgetting to like look up something on social media, but I'd love to even pull together a group of people to go together and experience it, you know?
Yeah, that'd be fun. We got to wear big poison ivy coverage because the poison ivy is crazy right now.
Yeah, for sure. Gwen, Brian, any JPNA-ish things to add?
No, I think the only thing we have coming up right now is Movies in the Park, and I think that had already been mentioned at
Good
Robert
deal.
Square.
Yeah, good deal.
Oh, there's Throwback Fest too. So that's a couple of weeks. That's mainly in Gladstone, but it encompasses the Jefferson Park area. So if anyone's interested to go to Throwback Fest, you can go there.
All right, very good. Friends, I did put here in our notes for carrying forward the links to the documents that Pastor Noemi shared last time around an invitation for specific education on healing and dismantling racism. So redigest those if you're led, and remember to be forwarding this to our other organizations as an invitation. We really want to convene people who have a heart for this to be a little incubator group to move forward with these materials or others. I hadn't typed it in the notes yet, but I had mentioned to Noemi the work of the Amity organization, Racial Amity, AMITY. Are you familiar with this? The
No.
Amity movement? Delighted to discover this a couple years ago. It's a movement. It may have begun in the Baha'i community, but I don't know that for sure. I happened to come across it in a Baha'i community. But it's a movement self-named, the Amity movement, for decades, dedicated to building cross-racial friendships and encounters as the step toward racial healing. And so it's really coming energetically from a different kind of activist space than some of the toolboxes that we often use. And so if you're curious about that, I encourage you to Google that, racial amity, AMITY. With that, let's adjourn for tonight. The next official meeting of Bridging Jeff Park is Tuesday, September 16th. I will be out of town that night, but I will be working remotely that week. So I'm hoping Sarah Foster, the brilliant colleague that she is, will consider setting up a computer in the fellowship hall so I can join long distance. And I welcome you all back to this same Zoom room. I'll remind you later on September 2nd for continued conversation of this book. We'll work on section 2, chapters 4 through 6. Until then, take good care of yourself. Or as
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Casey
you.
Kasem would say, keep your feet on the ground and keep reaching for the stars. Now
I
that
like
makes
that.
me feel
I
nostalgic.
like that. That's a good one.
That makes me feel nostalgic.
Yes.
And my old high
Thank
school
you.
would always say, shoot for the stars.
That's right.
Right,
All right. Good night, everybody.
Night, everybody.